Well, we would certainly like to welcome everyone to the very first National Association of Biology Teachers Inclusive Teaching Symposium. My name is Erin Baumgartner, and I am the current chair of the four-year college and university section of NABT, and I am very, very excited to have all of you joining us here today. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that our online symposium is actually taking place in locations throughout the US. And that puts us on the traditional homelands of nearly 600 tribal nations. And so we wish to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous peoples and First Nations inhabitants of all of our regions, and stress that as educators wishing to teach and welcome all students, it is important to value and learn and recognize and respect the traditional students of the land. As this year's NABT conference was scheduled to take place in Baltimore, we want to express particular gratitude to the Piscataway people, specifically the Cedarville Band of the Piscataway Conway, the Piscataway Indian Nation, and the Piscataway Conway Tribe, who are the traditional stewards of the land on which Baltimore, Maryland resides. I personally also want to acknowledge that Western Oregon University, where I teach, is located on the ancestral homelands of the Kalapuya people and on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary home of the members of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. Please take a moment with me and acknowledge the Native and Indigenous peoples on whose land we stand today. When the four-year college and university section came together to think about the possibility of hosting this symposium, one of our goals was really to put research on inclusive teaching into action. And so I just wanted to begin by sharing a sort of a personal story about my own teaching journey, in which I engaged in a practice that wasn't so inclusive. So as a teacher of introductory biology, I'm always looking for ways to make the subject more compelling for my students. And one of the ways that I try to do that is to make their exam questions interesting and engaging. And so I was working on an exam, and I decided that I was going to write all of the questions to have like fun little examples that the students would find interesting and compelling. And I decided to use one of my favorite examples and put all of the questions in the Star Wars universe. And so all of the test questions had some kind of Star Wars connection. So there was a question about decomposers that was like, Han shot first and left Greedo's dead body. Who would have broken down that dead body into its chemical components? And I was really excited to give this test to my students. I thought they're going to have so much fun with this. And they came in and they sat down and they got ready to take their test. And I handed it out. And about 5 minutes in, one of my students raised their hand, and I came over and they said, I don't know who any of these people are. And I said, well, that doesn't matter. You can just ignore this first part of the question, the little story, and focus on what the question itself is asking. And my student looked at me and said, and I will never forget this, English is not my first language. And I have to read through all of this extra information. It's going to take me way too long to complete this. And I realized that by trying to do something that resonated with my experience, I had inadvertently created an outcome that was not welcoming to all of my students and actually excluded some of them and made learning more difficult for them. And so that was a really important lesson for me in my journey, which is ongoing, to become a more inclusive and welcoming teacher of science. And so one of the things that I've always tried to ask myself since that day is, will this thing that I'm doing, this activity that I'm planning, this opportunity that I'm offering, will this be welcoming to all of my students, or will it exclude some of them for some reason? And today's symposium is really about helping us ask those questions. And our speakers today, I think, are going to give us a lot of interesting ideas and tools that we can use. One thing I also want to mention is that in the spirit of the Inclusive Teaching Symposium, our goal has been to include not just folks teaching four-year college and university, as not just folks teaching four-year college and university, as NABT covers all of those groups. Sorry, I think one of my children just turned on a device upstairs. So we'll just, we're going to be inclusive of parenting too today. So we want to be inclusive of all NABT membership, everybody from our elementary teachers through folks teaching graduate school. And so we have presentations today that are covering the full range of NABT interests. We'd like to encourage our membership to get involved in continuing on this opportunity. And so we hope to continue this symposium in future years. I'd like to invite the incoming chair of the four-year college and university section, Jackie Washington, just to say hello, as she's going to be carrying this effort forward as well, since this is a strong initiative coming out of NABT. Jackie?
Thanks, Erin. So my name is Jackie Washington, and I am a professor of biology at Nyack College, which is a small liberal arts institution in New York. And I have really, 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 really big shoes to follow, to walk into. I am so appreciative of this effort. I think for all of us, we can say that 2020 has been a really difficult year. But 2020, I think we'll look back and say it has opened our eyes to some of the injustices and made us more aware of some of the issues related to inclusivity, related to diversity, related to social justice. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for us as scientists to make sure that we think about these issues, especially related to our students and the future of STEM education in the US, and to make sure that we are inclusive in all that we do. And so this is a wonderful start. This is a wonderful partnership for all of us at NABT. So it doesn't matter what section you're in, we all need to be inclusive, from K all the way up through 16, K through 16. And so I think this is an awesome thing that we're doing, and it's something that we should continue to do from here on out. So Erin, I thank you for all your efforts. This is going to be a wonderful, wonderful symposium, which will help us to learn to be more inclusive. And hopefully we can, take what we learn here and then apply it into our respective classrooms wherever we are. So again, Erin, thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you. Okay, so one thing I will do is I will be sharing my email communication in the chat, so that if you are interested in helping contribute to plan or perhaps submit a proposal for next year's Inclusive Teaching Symposium, we can get connected early. So I will share that contact information as we get started. However, what I'd like to do now is introduce our very first speaker. So we are lucky today to have a series of presentations that were selected through double anonymous review, as well as 2 invited presentations that are really going to highlight the full range of opportunities that we have to offer. I'd also like to extend a very special welcome to the students of our first presenter who are joining us here today as part of their class experience. And we're so glad to have some future NABT members with us today. So we will first be hearing from Michelle Mann, who will be sharing her presentation, Two Imaginary Warrior Cats, Case Study on Science Identity Development Through Imaginary Play in 2 Girls. And I am going to hand things over to Michelle.
Hello, everyone. Now y'all can hear me. I'm not sharing video because my internet's a bit tenuous, so hopefully it will hang in there. I'm in rural Colorado. So I'm Michelle Mann, as I said. I'm from Adams State University, that's in Alamosa, Colorado. And I'm speaking on Two Imaginary Warrior Cats, a case study on science identity development through imaginary play. So in this ethnographic type study, I was looking at factors that contribute to the process of science identity in the science classroom. But what I found was there were more incidences of science identity work done around the science classroom, tangentially to the science classroom. So, my theoretical framework is on science identity, and it defines science identity as an individual being recognized as a certain kind of person in a given context, which means that if you were to talk about that person, you would identify them as a science person. Identity is shaped by one's position, prestige, power, and context, and manifests through activity, which reflexively shapes identity. A change in identity changes an individual's position, participation, and opportunities for learning. So in other words, identity is a social construct that is being dynamically negotiated in a temporal context. And as G explains, identity is never fully formed and is always potentially changing. It's very contextual. So my study site was with 44 fifth graders at Manuel Martinez Elementary School. And this is an urban charter elementary school in Austin, Texas, with high diversity numbers. It was a Title I school with well over 50% of the students qualifying for free and reduced lunch. 60% of the students were identified as at risk of dropping out. So it was a high needs elementary school. So to apply this to the classroom, I found in my research that there were spaces where identity work was happening in this school. And specifically, I was looking at science identity work. I found that there was with interactions with the class pet, during recess time, on field trips. And I got to accompany the students. I was in the classroom with them for 2 years. I got to accompany the students on 7 different field trips over those 2 years that were science related. And then when they actually, another place that was rich in science identity work was actually during lunchtime in the classroom. Some students would choose to bring their lunch back to the classroom and be together. So the first case I want to talk about is Ringo, the amazing leopard gecko, identity work as of the Ringo keepers. So there was a class pet that was a leopard gecko that was introduced at the beginning of the year, but was not really ever part of the curriculum. Although the lizard the students were allowed to go over and play with the lizard at any point and carry the lizard around as they were doing their work. So he was a part of the classroom, but never really a part of the curriculum. Well, with this lizard, I saw develop the second year, some students that emerged as a group, organically emerged as a group that kind of took their leadership in taking care of them. So I called them the Ringo keepers. They were led by Luna, one of the students, and she would every day come in and check on the lizard at the beginning of class before class started. She'd check on the lizard, change Ringo's water, tell the teacher if Ringo needed more food, that type of thing. So she took this on, and over time, the teacher recognized her in this position that just emerged. I mean, she just took on, and then the other students also recognized her. So it became if a student wanted to take Ringo out to the playground during recess, they would go and ask Luna, "Can I take Ringo out?" And she would answer yes or no based on weather or the condition, or sometimes even the student. The other student that emerged was Tim. Tim was one of the students that was very interested in Ringo, and because he liked Ringo so much, he also asked and got a leopard gecko as a pet at home. And because of that, he started doing research on leopard geckos. And he became kind of the encyclopedia of all things Ringo. So others in the class recognized him as the one who knew a lot about him. So when they had a question about Ringo, they would go to Tim to ask about his knowledge of leopard geckos. This case study, and of course it's very brief that I'm explaining, illustrates the relationship between identity work and learning. Because of the way that they identified themselves, it gave them an outlet and a place to learn more, and they became, all-knowing on leopard geckos. It showed also that identity work performed around a set of practices articulated across the various settings, recess, home, and classroom, and context, gave them a place for their identity work to happen. So a second place space that I found that there was a lot of identity work was at recess. And I know a lot of schools have kind of cut back on recess, and I hope that this encourages you to think about recess. But it was a time where the students were given to play. It was not organized in that way. And this recess was pretty well, it was a very small school. So the students had, the ability to also visit other teachers during recess and go back to the classroom and use equipment during recess. And we all know that play is related very closely to learning and growing. It was also a time that the Ringo keepers played with the lizard. Ringo, as long as the weather was good, got to accompany the students out to recess most of the time. It was a time where also our next case study where Luna and Inga played imaginary cats. Now remember, Luna was also part of the Ringo keeper, so there was a lot of times that Ringo was in her hands. But during recess, Luna and Inga were playing an imaginary game of warrior cats. And of course, it's a time where students had voices and choices on how to spend their time. So I don't know how many of y'all know about the Warrior Cat series of books, but it's a series that appeals to many, I think upper elementary and maybe lower middle school. And it's about these feral cats that have divided up into clans and live in different parts of the forest. And this is, it's there's several books, and there's also some series that have spun off of this original series. But in the books, they talk a whole lot about a lot of ecology things, of what the cats eat, what other animals eat other animals, different animals and where they live. And they connect it to, these animals live close to the river, so the cats hunt these things, and these animals live in the, in the rocky part of the forest, so they have a different set of things. And there's a lot of talk about their abiotic and biotic factors and how those affect the clan and over time. So Luna and Inga, as I was explained, Inga explained to me one day very quietly at recess that she and Luna play this, that they're part of warrior cats all day during school. And they reenact or play together in their imaginary the different episodes within the book. Inga is the leadership in this plan, in this imaginary play. She's the one that reads the books first, and she gives them then to Luna. Luna reads them, and then Inga often reads them several times over. I don't know that I was very, I guess, there's no other research on fifth graders doing an imaginary play as a unit, like two students doing it together in fifth grade, but I was amazed that it was going on. And then once they disclosed that to me, I actually saw evidence of it. They would use terms from the book. They would talk about, instead of saying humans or another person, they would talk about the two-legged. And there was terms that they used to play their imaginary game during the day. So Inga didn't normally have the leadership. As I said, I was following her for 2 years, and this is in the classroom. She was a very compliant student, but she rarely didn't ever lead in the classroom or in labs or anytime they were doing group work until they got to the ecology unit. And Inga had so much information in ecology that she had learned and practiced during this imaginary play that it gave her the confidence to take a leadership role. And when she started explaining to the students that their food web, which included a lion and a gopher and from a deciduous forest, a lion from Africa, didn't really work, that the animals had to be in the same area to be in part of the food web. And she, and as they worked through it, she took on that leadership role, and the students realized that she had the knowledge, and that changed her whole positioning. And for the rest of the year, she was seen as a science person. And she actually changed. She was accepted to 3 different academies for middle school, and she was going to go to the Arts Academy. And after ecology, she said, I'm a science person. I'm going to go to the Science Academy. And that kind of changed her whole trajectory in middle school. That episode giving her the confidence from her identity work. And then another case in point is schools need to provide opportunities to explore. Now, the students I worked with, for the most part, didn't have outside of school opportunities for science extracurricular. So they weren't going to Lego robotics camp. So all these things needed to be, were provided for them within the school situation. As I said, they went on 7 science field trips over the 2 years. The school was very dedicated to giving the students the opportunities. So on one of the field trips to the Texas coast, they spent the night at the Science Institute with UT Austin. They were exploring a wetlands, and the activity was to bring back examples of structures that help the organisms be able to live within the wetlands. So I was following a group of 3 boys, Tim, Isaac, and Juan. And the teacher just kind of casually said to them as they were walking out to explore the wetlands, he said, "I wonder what's making all of those holes." Well, this was a challenge. And Isaac immediately said, "Let's find out." So their mission during the wetlands was to see if they could catch what was making all the holes. So they tried several different ways to entice the crabs that were at the bottom of the holes. They stuck sticks down the holes and were hoping to get the crabs to grab a hold of the stick, and they would pull the crab out. And then they tried pounding on the ground, thinking that they would scare the crabs out of their holes. And finally, Juan pointed out that there were soft spots, and that must be where their tunnels were. So they started digging out the tunnels. And in the process, they were able to catch 3 fiddler crabs. I don't know if you've ever attempted to catch fiddler crabs, but this was quite a feat. And they would ask questions about the fiddler crabs as they were catching them. I was videotaping them at the time, so I was answering their questions about fiddler crabs. What do they eat? Why are they in the holes? Why, can they, walk through the water? Or do they have to stay on land? Questions like that. So when they returned to their classroom group, when they were called back, they returned, other people were returning with pieces of sticks and, pieces of plants, but these guys returned with 3 fiddler crabs. And if you know much about 5th graders, this made them instant celebrities. Everybody was gathered around wanting to hold the fiddler crabs and asking about them and how did they catch them. And so they were celebrities. In fact, the students started talking, they were talking to when they joined the other group about how Tim, Isaac, and Juan were able to catch 3 fiddler crabs. And so they became known as the fiddler crab catchers, I guess, for the rest of the trip. But this changed, especially Juan's confidence. Tim was already a leader in the sciences, but it changed Juan's positioning to a science person. And that changed his whole trajectory for the rest of the year. His science grades went up from a C to an A, and he was much more interested and actually were checking out books on the library out of different animals that lived close to the coast. So they had used their science skills to develop a method to catch crabs, and in the process, learned about the fiddler crabs. And throughout the process, the boys engaged in scientific practices. They also emerged as a community, that was recognized by the students and the teacher as understanding about how to catch fiddler crabs and being a fiddler crab specialist. So in conclusion, after looking at all these different, and of course I have a lot more of the cases to talk about, could talk about, but I realized that science identity work organically happens. I don't think there's a magic, we introduce this activity and we're gonna, create science people for the future. But I think that it's important to give a space and a time for science identity work to develop. Giving the students voice and choice and giving them some time to play, but within the science arena, on the field trips and on giving them those experiences. Providing maybe a classroom pets and science object for students to play with during their free time. Also in this classroom, there was a set of circuits and other objects, Legos and robotics that the students could, use their free time and come and play. And so therefore it gave them some chances to develop their interest. Classroom work can be supported through science identity. I saw a lot of what was developed outside of the classroom brought back into the classroom and changed the positioning and giving students some different leadership. And providing students with voice and choice, of course, as I said before. Science identity is work is very complex. However, I think if we can support the development with it and encourage it, that we can change the students. As I said, these students didn't have necessarily the outside of class opportunities. They weren't necessarily going to the creek and collecting organisms from the creek or hiking through the forest and doing a lot of the opportunities that a lot of students have and where they develop their love of science. But they were given those opportunities in school. So are there any questions? I'll stop sharing my screen here. Hopefully I can share my video.
And folks are able to put questions into the Q&A.
Okay.
You have questions? Michelle, I would love to know a little bit about you. You mentioned that the students checked out some books at the library and some other options like that. Did you notice that the group you were working with, did they make any kind of special efforts to look for books that were, very celebrated a diverse variety of scientific role models? I'm thinking about like the Rosie Revere books and some of the other books that
Yeah.
sort of shared with children.
I didn't notice that, but I did notice that Juan was checking out books about the sea and the ocean and the animals around it. So he was very interested after he learned about fiddler crabs to learn more about the whole ecosystem of that organism. But Now, my students were a very diverse group and had, as you all probably could tell by the names, that had a diverse background. So that was wonderful that that there was experiences that everybody could enjoy. We took 44 students to the coast, and of those 44, 35 had never been to the coast. They lived in Central Texas. So.
Oh, and it looks like we've got a couple of questions coming up in the Q&A. So we have like maybe 2 more minutes to answer questions. So Annika asks, what are the ways we can help our students be in a space to have the organic experiences come, and how can we encourage it? And I think sort of another question that goes with that is, if the opportunities are not available in elementary school, is it too late once we see our students in community college? And those kind of go together, I think. So
yeah, I'll take, first off, identity is constantly developing. So so I don't think community college is ever too late to or anything to give opportunities for that identity to be developed. And we never know exactly what situations and opportunities change an identity trajectory. It's kind of how the student takes it in and perceives it and views themselves. I think the biggest thing is to give lots of opportunity for experiences and exploring. And I know, at all the science classrooms now we're so structured and we're so standards-based, but, maybe outside opportunities and bringing stuff into, if they have recess time, maybe having some, maybe bringing out a field microscope during recess and giving that some of those opportunities to be able to develop during that time.
wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was really fun hearing about the experience of these students. We are gonna go ahead and move to our next presenter. So I would like to welcome Dax Ovid, who is presenting on behalf of, as well, their co-presenters, Jeff Shinsky and Kimberly Tanner, on exploring inclusive curricula in the life sciences, scientist spotlight assignments. And I will hand things over to Dax.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you for joining the NABT Symposium on Inclusive Teaching in the Life Sciences. My name is Dax Ovid. I use they, them, their, and she, her pronouns. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at San Francisco State University in the lab of Professor Kimberly Tanner, and I'm collaborating with Professor Jeff Shinsky at Foothill College on the Scientist Spotlights Initiative. I'd like to give a special thank you to our funders, the National Institute of Health Science Education Partnership Award, NIH-SEPA, and I would also like to acknowledge the thoughtful leadership of Professor Erin Baumgartner and also Professor Jackie Washington for chairing this symposium together. Lastly, thank you all for being here today. We're going to have an interactive session, so keep your keyboard at the ready, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you and sharing this project with you. Okay. I am living and working in the Bay Area, which sits on the occupied territories of the Ohlone and coastal Miwok peoples, who along with the Southern Pomo are organized as the Federated Indians of Grattan Rancheria. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Mawekma, Ohlone, and coastal Miwok peoples. I also want to acknowledge the context we live in: ongoing racial injustice, climate change, and a pandemic that exacerbates existing health disparities. I'm here today because I think it is imperative for students historically excluded from the sciences due to race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and ability to be in leadership positions in the sciences and to drive the research agenda going forward. I see it as my duty as a biology instructor to integrate culturally responsive curricula in biology courses so students are empowered to foster equity and inclusion in their respective fields and in their future careers. So an agenda for today, I would like to start with introductions and a sense of purpose. What brings you here? Why scientist spotlights? What is a scientist spotlight? Implementation tips and strategies, and then a reflection survey at the end before we jump into our Q&A. Please feel welcome to, if you have questions, to type them into the chat throughout the presentation today. I also have the Q&A open now, and I'll keep an eye out. If I'm able to answer it during the talk, I'm happy to. All right. Just a few notes on Zoom. There are the mute, unmute buttons, of course. The chat is a small speech bubble, and the Q&A also has the 2 speech bubbles. When you do type in the chat, please select panelists and attendees, and that way everyone can see our responses. So with that, let's jump right into introductions. So to begin, please type in the chat, who are you and what matters to you? And you can share your institution, maybe important aspects of you. Thank you. Please continue to feel welcome to introduce yourselves to each other. And next question, this is a quick and easy one. Have you heard of scientist spotlights before? You can type yes, no, or maybe you have, maybe you haven't, unsure. All right, I'm seeing some yeses, see a couple no's. Great. Okay, and then the last question I have, thank you. What brings you to the NABT Inclusive Teaching Symposium? This one you might need a moment to think about. What do you hope to get out of this session? You can type it in the chat or just think for yourself, like, what are you hoping to get out of today? Hopefully you type it in the chat so I can see and try and respond to that. See, learning from others being a theme, more strategies on how I can implement. Here are others are addressing inclusion, tips and methods on being more inclusive. Got recommendations, got a curriculum committee member, how to gather more evidence. I'll be alluding to evidence we've collected for scientist spotlights today. Great. Well, keep your why in mind, and I look forward to hearing more about what brings you here in the Q&A, hopefully. So next I have this quick little type in the chat Zoom poll. Some of you said, yes, you've heard of it. I saw some all caps yes, I saw some no's. My previous experience with scientist spotlights is that I have A, never heard of them before now, B, not used them in my teaching before and just starting to integrate scientists from diverse backgrounds, C, not used them in my teaching before, but I have visually presented scientists from diverse backgrounds, or D, I've assigned scientist spotlights as written assignments. Right, we have some people who've presented scientists in their classes, assigned scientist spotlights, never heard of them before. Very cool. Well, regardless of your previous experience with them, I hope to introduce them for people who are new to it, and also perhaps expand your perspective for people who've heard of them before. So why scientist spotlights? This is a Google search I did last week of stock photos of scientists to see what would come up. And I invite you to type in the chat, what do you notice about these stock photos of scientists? A lot of white lab coats, mostly white appearing individuals, white faces, a lot of smiling and posing, white males predominate, all inside a lab. Yes. So also very chemistry focused. That's an interesting point. The test tubes is the symbol of science. Some people not using proper PPE. And there is kind of one image that I find to be particularly problematic and sexist. Yeah, so this is what a student might see if they were to Google scientists. And I wonder, what are the messages young people getting when they search online for scientists, when they see a scientist in their textbook or in the media? And this is one of the motivations behind Scientist Spotlight. We're changing the world by confronting course curricula. And I think we all are thinking about how we can change the world to make it a better and more inclusive place in the sciences. The Scientist Spotlights cover course content, and this is used in place of reading and homework. They introduce biographical information from counter-stereotypical scientists, and they're performed typically out of class and graded only for timeliness and word count. And they specifically ask students to reflect on how they think about scientists as people. And the curriculum is this incredibly powerful institutional structure in education. It is something that is handed down generation after generation, and we may or may not have the time and motivation to change it. We think that using Scientist Spotlights is one way to take content and present it in a different way that represents the diversity of scientists that are doing the work. So a little bit more about what is a Scientist Spotlight. Here's the anatomy of one. This is a screenshot of the document. It begins with a brief biography about the scientists, their background, education, and research foci. Links to a biographical source, ideally where the scientist is talking about themselves and their experience, as well as research, which might be their primary research article or a video or podcast about the research that's related to course content. Next, there's this written assignment. And this is, I think, in connection to what Michelle Mann was thinking about and her presentation with giving voice and choice to students. This is a chance for students to share themselves, like, what do these resources tell you about the types of people that do science? And then at the bottom, last but not least, we have about the author. And the majority of Scientist Spotlights have been created by students at San Francisco State and Foothill College. And we're getting submissions from students across the country of scientists that are resonating with them and their backgrounds and their interests, and can be used and integrated into course curricula. So if you visit the website, scientistspotlights.org, this is a screenshot of the homepage. You'll be asked to register. It's completely free to register, and it's a way for scientists who share some very personal information, just a way to ensure we know who's looking at them and who we can acknowledge. This is what a spotlight looks like, and you can download the Word document that has those metacognitive writing questions on them from the website and assign them in your courses. Just a few student responses from the Scientist Spotlight homework. Wow, the article on Dr. Lopez and how she got to where she is today is truly inspiring to myself. It reminds me so much of my grandparents and how many non-US citizens deal with so much stigma and profiling and doubt, but continue to keep their head down and charging forward to break barriers and make something out of themselves. Another student shares, I can definitely relate to this scientist path to success. I've been told that only those affluent and with connections can make it in science. And I was even advised by a school counselor that I would never get far in life due to my need to work and support me and my mom. Though those words are discouraging, we need to cry it out, yell it out, and get ourselves back together and keep on fighting. We evaluated Scientist Spotlights. There's emerging research in the area. The original study was organized by Professor Jeff Shinsky in 2016. I invite you to look up the paper for those of you who expressed interest in the evidence and implementation. This is just a sample of one of the ways in which Scientist Spotlights were evaluated, and students were asked at the beginning of the course and then 6 months after to respond to this prompt. Based on what you now know, describe the types of people that do science, and if possible, refer to specific scientists and what they tell you about the types of people that do science. And I invite you to type in the chat based on these two different beginning of course, 6 months after the course Wordles, what do you notice? The size of the words depicts the frequency of those descriptions. Curious? After course, people are talking about all types of people that do science, more on core values identified later, less emphasis on the intelligent elite. And the second one is more inclusive. Yeah, and we noticed this too, and this is 6 months after the course is ended. So our next steps is to investigate scientist spotlights in secondary school settings. We're partnering with 18 teacher researchers to implement scientist spotlights in their science courses, so stay tuned. Just a few implementation tips and strategies. Take a moment to reflect for yourself. What would you do? How do I introduce spotlights as assignments to students? One thing I think is important is that you reflect for yourself, like why this matters to you and why inclusion in the sciences is important, and to share that with your students. I'm pressed for time, and can't I just present the scientist in class? Again, I think the inviting students to have the space to write and reflect themselves on about the types of people who do science is a really key aspect of the scientist spotlight. What if I cannot find a spotlight related to my course content? Check out our website, and I think there's a couple ways to respond to this. You could modify one to better fit your content, or you can create a new one, and you can invite, we invite contributions to our database. And then lastly, how often do I need to assign spotlights to have an impact? And we found that as few as 3 assignments in a given semester, we see shifts in the number of students who can identify scientists who are counter-stereotypical after the course is ended. So as few as 3. One person just posted in the Q&A, how important do you think the prompt is? And I'll get to that once we get to our Q&A. So I invite you to remember your why. What brought you to this inclusive teaching symposium today? And invite your students to write and reflect and connect the course content to the many different types of people that are doing scientific research. If you have questions, you can visit our website. There's an implementation tips and strategies section. And I would like to invite you, if you may, to complete this reflection survey. And I now will look at the questions. Thank you for choosing to join this session.
Dax, would it be all right with you if I went ahead and also put the web link to the Scientist Spotlight homepage in the chat for folks?
Sure, absolutely. Please do, before you check out that link though, please do take a moment to share your 3 takeaways from our session today. I'll give 30 more seconds for people to work on that, the takeaways, and then I will begin to respond to questions. All right. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Please finish if you haven't yet. And now for Q&A. I do see that there's one. Should I begin to respond? Okay. How important do you think the prompt is The one about what this tells you about the types of people who do science. Is it necessary to get students to realize what they are seeing? Is it annoying for students who might believe it's a liberal agenda assignment? And I think from what I've heard, from what I've seen from assigning it in my own courses, I don't think students interpret it as a liberal agenda assignment. No one's explicitly said that. I think that I tend to see more comments about, wow, I didn't know this. I didn't know that people would study this particular topic who look like me, or I didn't realize that it's, something like related to the topic or about the individual scientist. Like I didn't realize people struggled to become a scientist. Or one that really stood out to me was just saying like, for a scientist spotlight I assigned in my course is like, what an incredibly powerful Black woman who's doing research in this area. And when someone just acknowledges that this has made a difference for them and that they can relate to the scientist or appreciate their work, that tends to be the responses that we see when we assign our scientist spotlights. And this is a introductory biology course at San Francisco State University. So to me, I think I'm really excited to see the results of the pre-college assessments and assignments, and we'll see if any of the high school students happen to identify it. I see a couple more questions. One was in the chat, having done this in Nebraska, we've not had any negative comments about it being a liberal agenda or against their personal beliefs. Overwhelmingly, it's been a positive response, especially from marginalized students. And thank you for sharing that. I think we all just have to really try it out in our own context and see how students respond. One person asks, hello, Rita. Dax, what has been the response of faculty? Do they adopt the technique easily? Is it a hard sell to them? And I will say that there is a bit of variation. Some faculty readily embrace it and implement it in their course. And the faculty who tend to hesitate are saying, we have too much content, we can't fit this in. So one thing though that we try and emphasize is that this is being a tool that's used to teach the content. It's not something you have to add on. It's really important that it integrates with the curriculum. And with that, I see I'm at 20 minutes. So if you have other questions, please feel welcome to email info@scientistspotlights.org. I'm one of the recipients of that. And I look forward to hearing about all the wonderful work that you all do and how it works out in your context if you were to use them.
Thank you so much. I have a feeling you're going to be getting a lot of emails from folks. This is wonderful. And I might be one of them. Okay. I would like to now welcome our next presenter. And we are going to be hearing from William Martin, who will be talking with us about assessing motivation and utilizing motivational interviewing in introductory college biology for improved student success.
Hi all, hopefully you can hear me. I want to thank NABT and Aaron and all the people behind the scenes. It's amazing to pull off this virtual conference. So again, throughout the presentation, if you can drop your questions in per the previous presentations, that's greatly appreciated. I'll just pin myself down to the video quickly here. So again, William Martin. I teach at a small Midwestern, upper Midwestern Hispanic serving institution in Aurora, Illinois. So I've been doing college biology, introductory biology, for about 5 years. And it struck me most recently that I'm not sure necessarily who I'm always teaching. So throughout the semester, of course, we get to know our students. But how do we miss, I think, an opportunity to learn who they are immediately upon their entering the classroom. What are they bringing? And how do we maximize what they're doing? So obviously college retention, their ability to engage in college is often a connection to a professor, to a course, And so my goal, one of the things I strive for, is to bring that engagement immediately. So this is kind of my background to the research. So this started again about 4 or 5 years ago, where we're, again, a Hispanic serving institution, about 40 to 45% Hispanic. And this actually reflects the local area as well. So being a relatively science-heavy institution, very much into the health professions or allied health, we rotate through professors in this introductory biology course. So we're not seeing the AP students here. So those that already have college credit can move beyond this course. So this is a very much an introductory biology course. No math requirement. Everybody comes in. This is essentially a one course takes all. So the diversity of the students sitting in front of us is very broad. Obviously, we come from being a Hispanic serving institution. We are serving students that are traditionally or demographically sometimes challenged by the just demographically in the area. So again, being a mix of instructors, every one of us is bringing a different pedagogy. We have collaboratively worked to unify our instruction so that we are delivering the same content. In recent years, we've grown and we've actually decided to split out one pre-professional program. Specifically, this is going to be the nursing program. So they get their own class. They are now separated away. And there is then a mixed majors course. Again, introductory biology, 4 majors, but it's very mixed. So we have the pre-medical professions in there, from dentist, vets, DO, MD. We also have the applied physical therapy, occupational therapy, athletic training, exercise science. And we also have students that are taking this class as prerequisite for graduate school in sociology, psychology, or one of the human sciences. So very, very diverse, up to 10 different majors in the course. So what we wanted to do is obviously have a course that is going to measure achievement. And so we had a traditional mixed majors course. And so we do a pre-test and post-test within. And so what we found is that the new course for majors was absolutely doing just what we hoped, right? So the students came in and on the same test, pre-test, post-test, the mixed majors course was actually doing just as well as the pre-professional. So the new course was built and built out so that it could serve the students. But again, it's doing well in terms of serving the students. But then we started to notice some unusual data coming through. And this is a metric within that same population of students, where what we noticed here was that we have a huge discrepancy in terms of the grades and the retention in the courses. So I'm going to use a metric here called DFW. So this is our measure of those students that are getting a non-passing or grade of D or F, or actually fully withdrawing from the class. So what we see in this pre-professional is that our attrition rate was down to about 5%. So for those of you that teach introductory sciences, you know that this is very unusual. What is more traditional is this high rate of attrition, right? So some courses, some universities call this the sifting and winnowing class, right? That is not our goal at all. Our goal is quite the opposite, is to broadly lift and broadly allow all students to succeed regardless of how they got to college. And so we are generally pretty frustrated by this mixed majors number at 33%. So what we found is, oh, wow, something new is happening. And let's dig into that. So the student population here is about 300 total. And so we actually have a fairly large sample. Again, these are all freshmen coming in, or mainly freshmen coming in. So this was my impetus. This was the inspiration for the research. So best practices in pedagogy. Active learning has been exposed or proposed by AAS's vision and change documents. And then we have this efficacy has been shown to be useful, but buy-in can very much vary. So some active learning strategies can actually turn students off. So what we've found is that if you are a research scientist and you want to go in and do research, active learning in the lab, having to pose your own questions is inspiring and students dig in. But if you are going to be an applied scientist, so you're going to be an athletic trainer in exercise science, they're not interested and they recoil relatively quickly. So I will probably save, yes, I'll get back into what majors actually for that. So what we find is that we have premises. So Freeman had done the work out in Washington State saying, yes, there is efficacy of applying active learning strategies. Again, every instructor that does this uses slightly different techniques in the classroom. So what we see is this DFW rate is essentially equivalent across the different majors. There is a lot of work now coming out in terms of cognition and metacognition. So again, this is, do I know that I'm learning? How do I know that I'm learning? And what am I learning? And students can actually engage in this process. So the National Survey for Student Engagement coming out of Indiana University is suggesting that impactful practices, so learning circles, engagement circles, writing, some of the other active learning strategies that have been already discovered today are especially important for communities of diversity. So what we find is that this may actually lead towards benefiting our student population. And again, could this benefit to reducing our attrition rate? So motivation is kind of the third leg of this stool, is where are our students coming from? Do they want this? Because we can do active learning strategies at the collegiate level all day long, but if students aren't engaged in that process, if students don't want to do this, we can't lift rocks. We've got to have somebody that's malleable, that's going to be willing to work with us, willing to engage on this. So what we find is that there's work accumulating now coming out of the disciplines of education and social work, especially for at-risk youth and at-risk adults, that motivation, or discussions of motivation surrounding changing a pattern of behavior can actually be very efficacious. And then what we're seeing, maybe possibly you're seeing this in the news or advertising, right? There's lifestyle changes in performance. So there's this product out there called Noom. It's all about education or motivational changes to your health and performance. So, these are the three major pillars, and a lot of work has been done on the first two. My question is, who are our students and what are they bringing into the table? So the instruments I have here, I'll go through the details in a later slide, but I'm using the academic motivation scale as well as the intrinsic motivation inventory. And then the planned intervention. This was actually published in 2015 by Reich, working on the University of Minnesota, where they had in a psychological class or a psychology major upper level, essentially engaged students into an ORS process: open questions, affirmation, reflective listening, and summary reflections. Essentially a guided discussion. Why go to college? Why study? Studying sucks. So why are you doing it, right? This is not easy, right? And so you kind of get into this open, very honest discussion about, college is tough, right? 57% of students that enter college will actually finish within 4 years. And the numbers are not much better after 6 years. So, to sit in that room with these incoming freshmen from very diverse backgrounds and say, you're about to engage in something that's very tough, that honest discussion can be actually quite helpful for them. So this was completed using a digital survey, using the different scales. This was using a convenience population. I am one of the instructors of the sections. So again, what we had was 3 sections of pre-professional, so 3 sections of the nursing for about 200 students, and then I have about 100 students over in the mixed majors. So recruitment came through, and I had a 56% response rate for 152 completed surveys. I was absolutely thrilled because I figured this was going to be pulling teeth in a digital environment. Again, all of this was done essentially via Zoom. So Chromebox Alpha very quickly, and I'll use this slide to discuss the individual scales. So what we have is intrinsic motivation. I am here to gain knowledge. I am here to accomplish a task. I am here to experience something new. These are very much self-motivation or self-determination theory. Extrinsic motivation. I am here. I'm actually going to start at the bottom. A motivation. I don't want to be here. I was very, very fearful that I was actually going to get quite a high rating on this, but luckily, no. Students do want to actually be in college. External regulation. I'm here because mom and dad tell me to be here. Extrinsic interjected is a little bit nuanced, and it's more, I am doing college because that is what this other group does, and I want to eventually become part of that group. And then extrinsic identified is I see myself now as being part of that group, but this is still what that group does. It's really not me that's doing it. It's because I want to be part of that group. So it's, again, it's still external to them. And then the intrinsic motivation inventory goes through 4 categories of interest, enjoyment. I'm doing this because I enjoy it. Competence. I'm good at science, right? I should continue on with this. And then also choice, and then pressure and tension. So getting into some of the data, I'll move relatively quickly through this so there's time for questions. What we find is that in the mixed majors versus the pre-professionals, there is a stunning difference, especially in pressure and tension. So what we find in this case is that the nurses feel a lot less choice in what they're doing and a lot more pressure to do it. Maybe not necessarily surprising because they've already locked into their pre-professional category. Again, relatively large populations on both sides. Gender, females, again, what we find is that females have are feeling a lot more pressure, and they're also feeling a lot more of this is what I should be doing. In terms of ethnicity, what I was actually expecting to find was strong differences. However, in terms of our ethnicities, what we found was that there's really no significant differences in terms of motivation between white and other categories. Again, we're a Hispanic serving institution, so I wanted to look at specifically Latinx and Hispanic versus white. The other categories were too small statistically. I'm going to have to repeat this experiment over a couple semesters to gather more data. And again, what we found here is that the white students actually found more or less ownership of it. And so they actually have larger data suggesting that they are this is coming from outside. First generation, I thought this was very, very interesting. First generation is, again, finding more pressure to do college in a certain way. And again, externally interjected that I am to do this because that is what somebody else does. I don't have that ownership. So again, this gets back to the first talk today. Do you see yourself as a scientist, and how do you identify within that? We're seeing that's actually tracking all the way up to the college level. So in terms of the overall, these are my summaries. Again, lower choice, higher pressure in the pre-discipline of nursing. Females, again, reporting higher pressure. First generation reporting higher pressure. And actually Latinx reporting greater external motivation, maybe possibly because they are in the nursing category. So with that, I will stop and I will take questions. The question came in, apologies if I missed anything. Do the lower performing mixed majors tend to be one particular major? I have not figured that out yet. What I'm going to do is correlate the motivation here at the beginning of the semester to the grades that will be available here in about a month. So this is ongoing. And with that, I can field other questions.
If we have panelists with questions, I know it's a little harder to use the Q&A function. You're welcome to chat your questions or just ask them as well. So William, can I ask, and I know you sort of touched on this, I know from advising pre-professional students here in Oregon that we do actually have quite a few students who are first generation and maybe just are not as aware of, you know, they are very interested in pre-nursing and pre-medical careers because that is what they've seen on, you know, television, and their families are saying this is the path to the good life. And while they're really, really interested in science, they maybe aren't necessarily interested in that pre-professional science. And I don't know if by looking at the pre-professional groups versus the more mixed majors group, if you picked up on some of that or not.
I think it is. You know, I think what we're finding is that there's a lot of confused identity coming in. I'm going to be a doctor, right? I have no idea the path forward for that. And so, yes, we spend quite a bit of identity here, our time in that first semester doing career awareness and career availability. And so often what students find is that their perception of what the career path looks like is not actually what they want to do.
And then it looks like we have some more questions coming in, both in the chat and on the Q&A. So,
okay, I'll try to handle those. Not necessarily a question, but we're interested to gather data in a few years. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Is pressure really an extrinsic feature or intrinsic or extrinsic? So yeah, pressure and tension, the intrinsic motivation inventory is actually meant to span both intrinsic and extrinsic. So Bill, absolutely, thank you. That is actually an external, right? So that pressure or that tension associated with it. Students have felt, DFW rates in other majors. I'm not even there yet in my own major. So I hate to be that honest, but yeah, so what we're finding is there must be something in that nursing where, you know, specific engagement that immediately upon entering, they have an identity associated with that. You know, I think that may lock into our first speaker of the day, where, you know, just simply by seeing themselves in that space, they know that they're there and everybody else is in there. So there's this immediate connection to everybody around them. So again, we know that identity and connection to the cohort is so important in terms of retention, that maybe that, you know, that engagement that, yes, I am already on my path on day one may be enough. I don't know, but it's something that would certainly be interesting to pursue. In the chat, aligned with a project, essentially we're asking what kind of metrics are there. I think the metrics are on our campus, we actually have a learning to learn group. And so this came from a self-determination theory, and it was kind of sprung out of there. You know, they're looking at how to motivate students outside of using their own, you know, self-motivation. And so I actually kind of flipped it over and said, well, all of these active strategies are fantastic, but if the students aren't engaged in them, then I may be shouting at trees. So I want to make sure that I'm actually addressing students. Asked about medical careers. No, at this point, I've not looked at where the students are coming from. I would say that since there's a very high percentage of first generation, in general, what we find is that these students don't have a familial connection to a medical path.
fantastic.
Other questions? Otherwise, I'm afraid I'm over time. So.
No, you are right. Everyone has been right on time so far today.
Okay.
Really impressed, especially for an event that I'm associated with. This is really good. And we are going to try and leave a little bit of time at the end of our session for additional questions. And so far we're on track to be able to do that. So, but I am going to go ahead and introduce our next presenter. So Cheryl Lindeman is going to be sharing some more informal learning with us. Cultivating curiosity strengthens scientific inquiry. So I am going to pass things over to Cheryl now. And I'll be putting a couple of links in the chat that go along with Cheryl's presentation today.
Well, thank you very much. It's definitely an honor and a privilege to be with you all today. My former experience in K-12 was working as a life science teacher, starting in middle school and then working my way up through high school and college. And now I am a teacher educator. So I bring greetings from Lynchburg, Virginia. And can everyone see my slide? I'm trying to see about manipulating here. 1 second. There we go. So I want to show you something very quickly. This is a block, if you all can see it. And there's a little friend there. So I'm among friends, life science educators. Does anybody want to put in the chat what you think this is? This is a scanning microscope image of. Does anyone have an idea of what it is? Erin, do we have any takers?
Oops, we've got someone is suggesting tardigrade.
Actually a stink bug. So this was kind of my inspiration. You see this block, and I made more of these blocks. And this was during my first year of doing summer research with my students at the college level. And so we had our initial work that shows a little question here, what do you see? And so these were some of my inspiration blocks that were given out to students when I was out doing either informal learning with them or speaking at different schools. But where did these blocks come from? They actually came from my students who were at Central Virginia Governor School here in Lynchburg. I operated a scanning electron microscope lab, and one of my overall goals has always been to translate science research to the classroom. So in that process of learning about students and what they're doing in the K through 6th grade level, I really started to see what was the issue and who were the students who were interested and who were the ones that needed more assistance. And so this kind of translated into my 6 years worth of work about curiosity. Because I remembered and reflected back to my own experiences, you know, what was I curious about? Things in the backyard. What were things that you were curious about when you were younger? If you can think back to those early days, put that in the chat for us for a moment. And Erin, I think I need your assistance on that.
Okay, sorry. Let me know what you need.
Just read off what some of the people were saying.
Oh, I don't have anything in the chat yet. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll let you think about that. And as we go through the presentation, maybe you'll think of some things. But I have 3 guiding questions. And this research has really started out as action research. I aligned myself with a local family development center and went there on Friday afternoons and met with a group of students, and it ended up being a group of girls. And I'll tell you how the Curiosity Club came to being in a minute. So my guiding questions: is curiosity the missing link? Doing some of the reading at the national level, seeing that really they're, students who have this experience, yes, they're fine, but students who don't have that experience, how do they get that? And then creating this Curiosity Club model, how did it really come to be? And is it something that's worthy of sharing to others from what I've learned? And then finally, is it an effective way? Well, I hope to show you today by the photos, and I'd like to say that the parents have been gracious about letting me share these photos today, because they were just so proud of their young people, what they were doing, and how we really worked together over a 2.5-year period. And I must say, during the COVID experience, I haven't been over there yet, but we are experiencing, figuring out a way for next semester that my students can be involved virtually. So we think about informal STEM learning. You know, one of our questions is, where is it happening? If it's happening in their backyard, but what if they don't have the backyard? Who's involved? You know, do they have family members at home that can help guide them and experience new experience? And then the why. Why should we be looking at informal STEM learning? And the National Research Council publications have talked about that really we may be missing that particular piece. And so I really felt aligned with this, and this has been my driving pathway in involving some of my students at the college level who are pre-service teachers, and also getting some of the students who are in the sciences that maybe didn't think they were going to be teachers starting to like that. And I'm pleased to say that some of those students are teachers today. So then my next question was, looking in the research, why does curiosity matter? Why is it really important? Well, Markey and Lewinstein really talked about the history of it and the desire to really bridge the gap. What's that information gap? And we tend to do that when we're very young. And I know for my grandchildren right now, that sense of wonder and letting them look at something and letting them explore and just having that hands off and just getting an idea of where they are is really, truly, truly exciting. And then we do know from Wendy Oscroft talking about curiosity as a part of everyday life. And as we mentioned earlier in some of the other presentations, you know, letting the children, you know, are naturally curious and let them ask questions and let those questions continue. So if really we have curiosity as the center of learning, my question was, well, why sometimes is this not there? You know, what are we doing in education that changes that? And especially focusing on the standards, how can it be part of life and making sure that all children have this experience of feeling that sense of wonder, and teachers are able to continue with that? So that's kind of where it started. It started out as an after-school tutoring that I went with Family Development Center. There were other undergraduates from several other universities close by that were there, and they knew that Dr. Rell was coming and she was going to bring something in her bag. And so every time we went in the fall, we had different things, and there was frustration, but we also saw them starting to take a little bit of ownership. How are you going to do this? But the crux of my bag was really this curiosity kit. And so when I was able to share with the young elementary students that my students, my high school students, actually created these pictures and it was their interest. And the young man that took a picture of the stink bug, I remember him distinctively coming into class and saying, by the end of today, we have to put the stink bug under the SEM. I want to find out everything there is about it because I'm tired of it being in my room. So that was a real interest. So we included those. My summer research student helped me make different types of manipulatives. I have some of these on a Padlet that I will post later that can be downloaded and you can share them because that was the idea. But then collecting data in an action research, as you know, is kind of qualitative. And I always made a point that I would have these whiteboards. And so when my students would come, they would start asking, well, how do we know what's going on? I said, well, ask them a question. So one of the questions that our students would ask periodically is, when are you curious? And then the Curiosity Club girls would, you know, be very excited about drawing pictures. We also found out that when we start asking them, well, when should you be curious? Well, if you look at it, because it's important. Well, that was interesting to learn stuff, you know, because you get to ask questions. And one of the little girls said that she loved being in Curiosity Club because it was a place where she could ask questions, that when she was in school, she couldn't ask questions. And that was very troubling to my students. So how did the Curiosity Club start? Well, we started it with a model where we wanted to be able to constantly say, welcome to Curiosity Club. And who's curious today? And that gave them a sense of, you're not here to learn things from us. We want to learn from you what kind of things you're doing. So we came up with this board, and they had to sign in, and they signed in with the little tongue depressor that they made, and they took ownership of it. That was something they liked. There would always be something on the table for them, and they would just have to look through it. Always had a book. Rosie was there a lot. Some of the other books, there'd be a puzzle, something to get them to start initiating questions. We always had to observe, we had to investigate, and then we had to share. So at the end of the time period, they either shared with their parents, they shared with one of the other education people there, but it was really kind of a cool thing. So what were some of the key elements? Well, one of the key elements was shifting from the tutor or the teacher, because the tutors were any of the pre-service teachers who would come and help me, from them asking questions to the students asking. They, of course, loved slime a lot and thought that was really cool. But then there was a shift. There was a shift. And that shift is what I captured in this visual. And you will find it in the handout that you have. And so we found out that the students were generating the 5 W's, and then finally figured out what was the informal piece. They were asking those inquiry questions. They were asking, who's curious today? It kind of set the stage for them. And that seemed to be really the sense of wonder for us who are working with them. Probably the neatest one that we have, and I've put in the chat link for you, is when one of the little girls said, we had paper there. I said, well, what do we know about this? I'm curious. What do we know about paper? And the discussion went on, and all of a sudden the one little girl said, well, can't we make paper out of peppers? And I went, I don't know. Let's find out. So they had to come up with their list. And as you can see, it was pretty much a very messy day, but it was fun. And they were totally in charge. Safety was definitely something we talked about all the time, but they did that. We found, though, that really the manipulatives really mattered, and that paper and pencil ended up generating really cool things. And so one of the other projects that I will add to our list of shareables is Curiosity Land. They came up with this game that is just phenomenal. The game actually gets them to start reviewing skills. It got them to think about how you coordinate, how you think of math. The one way in this corner is very convoluted, but it was a review. They said, well, they had to review science and math. Then the other one that really was very revealing was the Adventures in Eyeball City. And in Eyeball City, I was able to give them these little people, and I said, I'm curious, who are these people and where do they live? And they each got one. And before you know it, they ended up making a city. They thought about what was happening in Eyeball City. They were concerned about the environment. They were concerned about each other. They were concerned about having a safe environment there. Very, very revealing. And that is developed into a little book, and it's going to be an ebook very quickly. Then they went into some of the what ifs, and they wanted to play with slime all the time, but we start saying, well, we're curious, what would it look like? How could we do this? And here was an example of where they were taking a box and they wanted to see if they could really see if the slime was glowing, which I thought was quite interesting. That was toward the end of the whole process. The curiosity kits, I've assembled them, I've given them to the schools, and several of the children have taken them to their class, and they were the ones that were doing the sharing, which I thought was quite interesting for them to do that. So they became the real owners of the Curiosity Club. Why did we call it a Curiosity Club? They wanted to make a club. And they said, well, if we're curious, we can be in a club. They thought that was really important. And so the mission of the club was to observe and to investigate, to ask questions, and to share curiosity with others. Some of the neatest examples of what the children did is they would come back and we'd say, well, who was curious last week? What did you do? And a lot of times they were sharing things with their families. And I thought that was extremely exciting. I plan on going back to visit the families. Obviously, we weren't able to do that this past spring, but when the parents or the siblings or a grandparent would pick them up, the children would definitely bring them to the room and would share what's going on. So what were the inclusive teaching outtakes? I thought it was really important that working with pre-service teachers and other tutors, that trying to make sure there was an inclusive mindset training, getting them to understand that these children, didn't go on a boat to the ocean. They weren't out there collecting things. They had to be taken there in some way. And if they couldn't get there, how could we do other things to help them keep that curiosity going? Intentionally getting the pre-service teachers to stop answering questions, but keep asking those posing curiosity type questions, and to be sharing some of the things that they were doing. And really the best way of finding out the evidence was collecting the photojournals, some of the expressions, the authentic workshops. It was really quite neat, I thought was very revealing. But this whole process turned to be extremely exciting. And I hope will enjoy some of the resources that I've presented for you today.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And I'll also be, as I mentioned, I posted the 2 links in the chat that Cheryl shared, and I saw some of you were also sharing some ideas in the chat, and I'll get these over to NABT as well to add to this, the website where we're hosting the materials from today. We do have time for a couple of questions for Cheryl, if anybody would like to add. I want that Curiosity Land game for my own self. Oh,
it was, and the whole beauty of this is the fact that the students are, it was so organic. And I think that's the most important thing that my students learned as pre-service teachers, that you can have the overall goal, but letting the students be in charge becomes, you can't teach that. You have to experience it. And so for those of us who are doing outreach programs, I can tell you that it's been in several different elementary schools in the afternoon programs where they have like a 21st century program, and they've included the Curiosity Club idea.
So we have, Sue Ann has shared a question with us in the chat, which is just, can you imagine this in the curriculum rather than extracurricular?
Oh, of course. And one of the science teachers in a local elementary school that's a Title I school, she uses it in one of her 4th grade classes. And it works extremely well. So the students know that when it's Curiosity Club, they're in charge, and you have to develop that. And so when I went to introduce it to her class, we used the Curiosity Kit. That was the way they got started. And then she took it off. It was, she definitely had it working well.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I'm just going to let you all know, if you saw me make a face, it's because there's an angry child outside raking leaves right outside my window. And she was making faces at me. So we are going to move on to our last presentation. So I would like to welcome our next group of presenters. Several of them are here with us today. Michelle Withers, Eliza Riley, Sue-Ann Yang are representing the full group that includes Peter Gergen and David Parfit, and they'll be talking about supporting inclusion and persistence in STEM through active learning and civic engagement. And as we reach the end of this presentation, if we have a little extra time, we can open things back up for questions for all of our participants today too. So, all right.
Thank you. So thanks everybody for coming to the symposium today. And I want to thank Erin and Jackie and Sue-Ann for this opportunity. So I'm Michelle Withers. I'm an associate professor at Binghamton University. I do biology education research and work with our Center for Learning and Teaching. I'm going to be presenting today with Eliza Riley, who's the director of the National Center for Science and Civic Engagement and also the director of Censor. And we're going to be presenting on behalf of our colleagues, Sue-Ann Yang, Peter Gergen, and David Parfit, who are all faculty in the SUNY system. That's important because our project is about creating points of transformation in SUNY STEM education. So I wanted to start with a quote. This quote is particularly resonant right now with what's been going on in the US. You can see from the date on this is by Michael Roth, who is an administrator at Wesleyan University in Texas. And he says, politics can break your heart, but the only way we can make the country better is to listen to our neighbors and contribute to the community's well-being. And that's particularly useful for the project that we're going to tell you about because it has a really strong community engagement component to it, part of that being relevance and part of that being bringing purpose to students to feel that they are making a contribution, and that when we look at students where that's important, we're able to hook and pull in some of those students that are traditionally left behind by STEM. So this is our vision of STEM education. And I'm sorry, I just forgot your first name, the person who just talked. You were talking about the sense of wonder and joy and that curiosity, and that's something that we think is really important too at the post-secondary level. So we think that STEM education should be inclusive, it should be relevant, it should nurture whole person development. This isn't just about sending people off to the job force or creating mini-me's that go on and do the same things that we're doing. We want to nurture whole person development. We want students to feel a sense of wonder and joy and the potential for discovery and meaningful contribution while they're in college. And we think that our training and the way that STEM trains and treats students should contribute to the greater good, that is more important than this idea of creating a workforce that looks like us. So the big project goal here was joining forces of two programs. That's why Eliza and I are talking. I'm the director of the Mobile Summer Institutes on Scientific Teaching. This is a 5-day intensive program that began back early in 2003. Joe Handelsman created it. And it was meant to be sort of an intensive boot camp for faculty who didn't necessarily have any pedagogical training to help them learn some of the most effective evidence-based practices from the education literature that they, in most cases, probably didn't have formal training and weren't aware of. The Censor project happened or occurred a little before that, so both of these programs harken back to the early 2000s, seeing that issue with the difference between what the education literature was telling us we should be doing in our classes and what was actually happening. And the Censor project had more of a focus on that civic engagement and hooking students' interest and getting them engaged in STEM content, but using those sticky, tough societal problems that they were going to be interested in. So the three main parts of the project were to leverage the strengths of these two programs which were very complementary, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that complementation in the next figure, to leverage the connectivity in a state system. So both of these programs have been doing faculty development, professional development for almost 2 decades, and they've been working with different schools, with individuals. And one of the things that we wanted to know with this project is, if you go into a state system where you have multiple schools and you have connectivity within that system, can you push or drive the adoption of evidence-based practices faster because of that connectivity? And can you build sort of this system-wide, we know community is important, so can you build this system-wide community of educators that have a common vision so you can share and distribute some of that workload and have that support that you get from a community? So that was the goal of this project. And when you look at the 2 projects, as I said, they complement each other very well. So we like this yin-yang approach, and Sensor really was sort of the why of what we were trying to do, and the MOSIs, or the Mobile Summer Institutes, were the how. And the thing that let us fit together so nicely is we both had a very common, you saw that our missions were really similar on the last slide, and we both had a really common goal of improving student success for all students and advancing faculty development. But the way that we did that was slightly different. So I'm going to pass it off to Eliza and let her tell you more about the Sensor approach, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the MOSI approach.
Thanks, Michelle. Sensor was started as an undergraduate and particularly a general education and science project. So our goal was less focused on creating STEM majors in the pipeline, but in increasing STEM, I hate to use the word literacy, but STEM understanding and the effective engagement in STEM on the part of all students. So we started with the relevance question. The way we deal with inclusion is to find out who our students are and what do they care about. So Sensor helps faculty develop courses around civic questions, public questions, and they're unsolved public questions that are of particular relevance and interest to students' lives. The insight came from a course at Rutgers University in the 90s on HIV/AIDS, and it was basically the reframing of a standard intro bio course around biomedical issues of HIV/AIDS. And to the great shock, 400 students showed up the first iteration and 600 the next iteration. It was clearly, this is the 90s, so you have to remember how important that issue was nationally and internationally. It was something that really grabbed the attention, and that was used to leverage interest in STEM and real competence in biology. But the other issue is that it clearly led to all sorts of it bled over into other kinds of knowledge and understanding, ethical, policy, the questions of stigma, psychological problems. So it became the kind of founding nugget of insight into expanding this to other questions, other disciplines, and looking at science education in the systemic way, so that the problems drive a systemic understanding of science as embedded in a larger cultural and social world. So we've done pretty well, I think, in terms of recognition. And in 2015, Adriana Kazar and the NSF funded a study of what they called communities of transformation in STEM, and the Sensor project was considered one of the 4 transformative projects. And it's really it's faculty that were transformed by this question. So that's what Sensor is.
Yeah, and so you can see from what Eliza said about having that civic engagement and the relevance and that hook and getting students into it in that way. And to support that, they knew they had to help faculty get training with evidence-based practices so that they could do that effectively in their classroom. And that was sort of the focus on that hook and the civic engagement with the support of the evidence-based practices, whereas the mobile summer institutes were very much focused on the mechanism, let's get you training in evidence-based practices and make sure you're good at that. And by the way, while we're doing that, when you're setting these things up, you should hook these with relevant things. So we each had sort of a focus on complementary things and then support from the other. So this 1-2 punch of bringing these programs together makes them both more efficient and more effective. So what we've done in the last year using a SUNY grant was to do strategic targeting of institutions distributed across the state to get that 1-2 punch of both a Mosey and a sensor, either at the same school or in the same region where people could do that. Now, the pandemic happened, so we weren't able to complete our entire plan. We had planned 7 different workshops. One was this Northeast SI that was already happening at Stony Brook in the summer. And so our grant paid to send some schools, some folks from schools on Long Island there. And then we were going to do a sensor and Mosey at the western part, the central part, and the eastern part of the state. We were able to do part of those. So you can see the ones that are in purple are the ones that actually happened. And I'll just shift to the next because this just gives you a summary of our outcomes. So the ones that were able to happen, we were able to actually still carry out 4 of 7 of those programs. And what was probably most important and notable about how we did that was that the sensor and Mosey were both in-person workshops. And when the pandemic hit, we put a lot of time, people hours into transitioning those into online. Now that's important down the road because both of these have been funded by NSF and or HHMI in the past, but they're both now in a self-funded model where schools pay for those workshops to come to them. So that makes this a much more accessible, equitable, lower cost way to bring those in. And in addition, for sort of next steps, we are working on expanding this pilot program. We're writing an NSF grant to expand that. And also out of this has come discussion about potentially a master's program within the SUNY system that would, again, be science for the public good that would bring students in who had STEM degrees, undergrad degrees already, maybe thought they were going into a certain career, decided that wasn't going to happen, and then gives them a mechanism to get training to spread out with those very generalizable skills that they get in STEM. So with that, I will just acknowledge the founders of the original Summer Institute, the Mosey and Sensor folks this summer who helped us transition to online, the schools in the SUNY system that both supported this by holding things and giving money, the SUNY IATG program, which was the funding for this, and then Insight and BTSE, Bridging to STEM Excellence, which are 2 national groups that bring a lot of different STEM initiatives together. And in fact, Eliza and I first met through the BTSE program. So with that, I will take questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle and Eliza, and to your colleagues as well. So yeah, we definitely have some more time for questions, both for our last group of presenters, and then to open it up for any additional lingering questions that folks may have for our other panelists and presenters.
Is it easier for me to go out of share mode to do questions? Do people have a preference? Do you want me to stay in share in case people want to go back to slides?
I don't know. That's a great question. Whatever works best for you, Michelle. I can also help track the questions.
Okay. If you'll track the chat, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A if any come in.
I'd like to just say a few more things about the issue of inclusion, because when Michelle and I met, we realized that the Moseys did a very deep dive on one full day on creating the inclusive classroom and thinking about diversity and inclusion, but making sure that students saw themselves in the process of science learning. The sensor approach is different because when we think about that quote that Michelle put up about working with our communities and our neighbors, it kind of try to look at our students as our neighbors. What is it drives them? What are they motivated by? What are the problems in their community that we could use to leverage some really strong science learning? So many of the sensor courses are things that are recognizable, but they're also community based. They could be a polluted stream in the area. But then there are also questions like the implications of race for stem cell research, or ones on uranium dumping on Navajo lands. That's trying to show people that science is not in isolation. It always involves human beings, and to some extent, it always involves social justice. So social justice has been a big emphasis of a lot of sensor courses.
So one question that I might have is, this seems like a really amazing opportunity to gain from both the MOSI and sensor structures. And I know it's early, are there plans to extend these opportunities beyond the SUNY system?
Yeah,
You knew I was
absolutely.
going to ask that.
Yeah, and in fact, if this isn't something that we've advertised, both programs, as I said, are now in their phase of the no longer grant funded stage, but both programs would be open to schools, and so schools could ask for this, but since it's so new, I just don't think very many schools know about it. And our targeted approach with the trying to get the research money for it was about that, those research questions about how can you drive that change using leveraging what all the connectivity that's in a system. But absolutely, both the programs have those things now, and I guess that's something Eliza and I should think about if we should be doing a little bit more advertising, not just for our individual programs, but for having this kind of a 1-2 punch. Because what we did this summer, essentially the way I think it plays out well, and I think you could do it in different ways, but the sensor workshop to go into an institution. So we went to SUNY Geneseo, sorry, I can't always do that. We went to SUNY Geneseo, and basically, I think it was like it was basically what used to be a full intensive 1-day workshop broken out over 2 days, where people think about how they want to design courses around these sticky societal problems like food deserts, climate change, social justice in availability to medical treatments, things like that. How do they want to do that? And then once they've done that, you could have a MOSI come in behind that. So now you've got that relevance thing. How do you actually develop the active learning modules that are going to help your students get the concepts and skills that they need to be able to solve those kinds of problems? And as we were saying, Sensor, when it's its own package, they do that big curriculum thing, but they also talk about the evidence-based practices to back that up, things like active learning and backward design. But if you have a 1-2 punch, you're going to make those two workshops together be more efficient, because the redundancy parts aren't going to be there anymore. They're going to support each other.
Yeah, and also just to point out, both of these projects are very sort of durable and long-standing. We both are large networks. Like Sensor has over 7,000 faculty have gone through our faculty development programs. And so we're not a new thing, and there's a network, but the value of joining it with the MOSI network, which is also very large, but not a lot of overlap. So, we're also multidisciplinary. So that's another factor. We don't just deal with 1 or 2 science, a lot of science reform is like Pulse or BioQuest or something that's specific to disciplinary stuff. But we've also worked a lot with Jackie Pepin and NABT and people there. We have many people from all of these projects in Sensor because it's not really competing.
Thanks, Sue Ann.
Do we have other questions out there for any of our panelists? Questions that folks have that are remaining? I know we've had a couple of folks have to step out just because it's 2020 and we all have busy lives. I'm using my wait time that I learned about at MOSI when I took one.
I could also mention that we do informal ed too. Like we have a big slice of our work because it was actually the NSF's informal science people that noticed that our project is, quote, learner driven, which I thought was a very interesting thing because, you know, Mosey's are definitely learner centered. But as somebody pointed out to me from NSF saying, ours is learner driven, meaning that the students themselves have a big stake in the pursuit of the inquiry.
Well, given that we are approaching the end of our time here today, I would just like to extend another enormous thank you to all of our presenters today for sharing their work with us. I would very much also like to thank NABT, our executive director, Jackie Reeves-Pepin, and Janet Curran and Megan Coley, who handled all the behind the scenes infrastructure. Anytime anybody asked me a question and I said, I'll get back to you on that, it's because I was checking with them and they were fixing things and making things work. So really very grateful to them. I also want to thank Jackie Washington for all of her hard work helping me put this together. And someone whose name you've heard quite a bit today, Sue-Ann Yang, who this summer, when I was worried things might fall apart on me, Sue-Ann saved the day. She listened and gave good advice and was just there to help out. And so a big thanks to Sue-Ann as well. So, and thank you to all of you who joined us today. We are so glad that our first Inclusive Teaching Symposium has been a success. And thank you very much. And with that, I think I'm going to close our time.
Thanks to everybody.